Hi everyone! We're super excited about this show. It's our first Pride show, and it's about Mystique and Destiny. Ship name Mystiny. We don't even need a ship name anymore because they canon now. But anyway, we're gonna talk about that with some really special guests, which I'm really excited about. We have Caleb over here, unimpressed Fabe. We already invited Caleb a while back to talk about Inferno, and it was clear that a mystic soul had to have Caleb on it. And we have Nola Rose Pau, which is over there in that corner, from Women Write About Comics. She's the editor in chief, if I'm not wrong. So it's like, wow, we have some really cool guests today, and Women Write About Comics is like top notch. Like, we love it at Comic Watch. I'm just saying it. We really love your publication, and when I started writing stuff for comics, that's mostly what I read. So I'm really happy to have you here. We have Teeth, a Ghost Mutant on Twitter, who also posts a lot about Mystique. And so, like, we have to have, because I have read your threads, and I'm like, yeah, this is the type of shit we have to talk about here today. And we have Lisa from Simply Amazing Podcast, which is a podcast about Nightcrawler, which you can make a podcast about Nightcrawler. That gave me some ideas. And it's very exciting because just today they released a t-shirt with all profits going to the Trevor Project. You can explain it more, Lisa, if you want.
Oh, so we just I came up with the idea during the last episode we did. We ended up talking about Juggernaut and Black Tom, and my co-host Lauren, who sadly couldn't make it today, said they're what was it? Oh, now I can't remember what it is. They're not just buddies, brah. And I was like, oh, that would be so funny on a T-shirt with them. And I figured let's make a T-shirt and let's put it out during Pride Month, and let's give every single penny that we get from it to the Trevor Project. So that's what we're doing with it. Yeah, you can Simply Amazing Pod on Amazon or on Twitter. That's where you'll find the link and everything. So yeah, go buy one. They're really cool.
Yeah, I'm putting the link also in everything social media wise, so
Oh,
people
perfect.
have it right there on Facebook, on YouTube. I'm not sure if it's gonna post on Twitter, but either way, I'll post it later. So
Beautiful.
yeah, so that's who we have today, and we're gonna talk about like my favorite couple ever. So I'm ready. We're all ready, and and we have Gabriel and me as the usuals. Sorry, Gabriel. Yeah, I forgot to present us sometimes because of the
It
very
happens.
cool guests that we have. That's the main reason. Okay, so ready, go. Yeah.
This week on Mutant Watch.
Okay,
Woo!
so Mystiny, the first thing that I wanna ask you all, because like these characters are really important in terms of what they mean for like historical representation, also for that subtext at the moment, but right now the way it's been reframed, it's also for representation, and we can talk about a lot about how that subtext was not so subtextual. But like these characters have been very important in terms of setting a preference, setting a reference of representation of various kinds, both because they're a sapphic couple that lasted a long time, they're polyamorous, they're old, which is also not I think not seen a lot when seeing queer people in media, and they are badass. So I want to ask you all, what do you think is the importance of like the meaning of having these two characters in all the complex ways that it means? It's a very open-ended question. I'm sure we're gonna like chat about it. So whoever wants to go first.
Oh, we're all being so nice.
So, I came up on like full on in the middle of like Claremont X-Men, and like my first issues were right around the time when Mystique and Destiny, like right around those issues where they came in, and one of the things that always struck me about those was that you've got the one issue, I think it's 177, where like Mystique's got her training montage where she's fighting X-Men robots, and then you cut from that to this scene of the two of them in like bathrobes with Mystique's like head on Irene's shoulder, and it's like it's hard to look at that and not realize what is going on there, and it kind of always surprised me that people didn't see that, because it's so blatant. It's obviously Claremont couldn't he couldn't do it at the time because of comics code and because of editors and everything else, but it's just seeing that and seeing that kind of quiet domesticity with these characters who ostensibly were meant to be villains. Like it's, I don't know, like I glommed onto them right at that moment, and it was just forever after that.
I would agree with that 100%. It's interesting. Like you say, people who didn't see it, I'm going to say that it wasn't that people didn't see it so much as people chose not to see it. I think that's more because it is incredibly blatant. I mean, their love story is more intense than most other love stories that we see in comics. And the one thing I think, like you say about them being villains, the one thing that I think makes their love story so incredible and so meaningful is that Destiny is really the only thing that humanizes Mystique, because otherwise Mystique is just absolutely a monster. I mean, she murdered one child, she tried to murder another child. Like, she's a monster. But Destiny is that one thing that like tethers her to her humanity, is that love that she has for Destiny. And I think that's a really cool story to see too.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think similarly, anyone who knows me knows I love villains more than anything else. And I love that these two women get to be unapologetically queer and still villainous in a time where a lot of our queer representation in comics are meant to be kind of like exemplars of morality, and they're like unquestionably good. I love that Mystique and Destiny kind of toe that line, especially in modern stuff where they're kind of in this gray area where you can read them all types of ways. And I don't know if we get that level of complexity in characters, especially queer characters, because sometimes folks are afraid of misrepresenting or becoming a caricature. But I think Mystique and Destiny, because of their long-term romance in the comics, they're able to kind of toe that line a little more than some newer queer characters. So I think that's my favorite aspect of them as a couple, is that they're just unapologetically badass women who do evil sometimes.
I kind of like what you both were saying, is I find Mystique and Destiny so interesting in the fact that they are queer villains, but they're not villainous by being queer. If anything, their queerness is their redeeming factor. Like you were saying, it's their tether to their humanity. It's what keeps them moving forward and keeps them in the gray area for a lot, rather than just full on evil, because chucking babies off cliffs is a hard line to come back to. But that love story manages to kind of anchor them a little bit.
Yeah. He was,
and I think
she was going through a lot.
And I think that says a lot about them, is that love story is so central, despite it being something they couldn't fully acknowledge for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to, point out that probably the best thing that ever happened to Kurt was being thrown off that cliff. So,
It was secretly a favor.
Yeah,
She
it
was
was.
just-
Yeah,
She knew he was going to be a teleporter because Destiny's a precog, and she was just trying to activate his mutant abilities early.
yeah. It's like when mother birds push their baby birds out of the nest. Some of them will, some of them will be crushed on the ground, but some of them will teleport.
You know what? Destiny had a nice long chat with Mystique and was like, "We are going to be horrible parents to this child. Just chuck him off a cliff. He'll be fine. I know these things. It's what I do."
Yeah, no, chuck him off a cliff so he can meet his sister/girlfriend. Oh, we don't need to get into that.
I love how we are already here. Okay, so anyone else before I go? Tis, do you want to say anything?
I don't really have anything to add. I agree with everything that was said.
So yeah, I like picking up on something Gabriel said. These two characters, they're villains. They're not always exactly villains, and as time has moved on, especially towards the present, it's like a really weird situation where they're like some type of anti-heroic, some type of villain at the same time, which are also my favorite characters because they're morally complex. And they also have like a really great goal in mind, especially Destiny, because Destiny, what most she cares about, and we will talk about her more later, is like mutant kind and like the future of mutant kind. So like they have some of their evil plans have like a really kind of like redeeming quality of wanting better for their community by doing like evil things. And that's like a very queer thing to do, like doing like things that are like probably not morally the best thing because you need because of liberation. And I think that's one thing that connects with what Gabriel said. Their queerness is one of the things that makes them more ethically grounded, like the relationship and the way they show their love for each other and for every other mutant in that way. And that is especially gets to the maximum point in Inferno. But like that's one of the things that makes them so cool. But also I think it's really, really important, and I think it's a thing that not a lot of people talk about Mystique and Destiny, is that even if this is not like explicitly said in the text, it's not a word that is used. They are a polyamorous couple. They have other multiple relationships throughout their lives, and they are together since. I think it's the 1900s, like since the
1900s.
Since the 1900s till Destiny dies, and then onwards when she's resurrected, and their relationship is very like stable and like it's like an example of a relationship that lasts. And I think that's something that a lot of queer people can benefit a lot from seeing, even if it's villains, even if it's like, because those also transmit values, and there's like a value of them in like a different way of understanding loyalty that I really, really like, and that I think it's like profound for me. It was for me. I think reading I'm really bad with numbers, but some Uncanny X-Men, there's one in which Destiny sees the future and she's like that they're lost, like she has like a great crisis, and she like it goes to like kind of like comes herself with Mystique and talks with Mystique about it. And it's great because like I feel like their loyalty and their values are not based in societal values, in like what you need to do to have like a couple that you marry and you whatever. And it's something different and much more profound. And that's something that I really, really love about reading those issues. And that has stuck with me with time. And aside from that, I think in universe, and I wish Marvel did more with this. I think in universe there are really important piece of representation because they have been there being a sapphic couple in eras where that was like explicitly prohibited, and they have been like sustaining their relationships even when it was forbidden, especially in canon because there is from the 900s till today. And I think that's also something important that could be explored more, especially what it means for other LGBT mutants.
Yeah, I think that they're kind of the model on which the current Krakoan approach is built, because, like you say, their ethics and their morals were defined around being a queer couple in not just one age, but several ages where that was not allowed. It was prohibited. It was, and then to be mutants on top of that. And like one of the whole precepts of when Hickman and crew found it, like put together this Krakoan thing, was that like everything that mutants do under oppression or trying to survive in a world that wants to exterminate mutants is forgivable up to the point like founding of Krakoa, because there was no safe place for them. And when you have a system that is determined to wipe you out no matter what, when it criminalizes your very existence, you cannot be held accountable for doing what you need to in order to survive and in order to thrive, because you've got the entire world against you. And I think that those two especially, like when I mentioned them originally, I said ostensibly villains because of that. They're villains because the narrative demanded villainy at the time. But as a queer couple, and especially as a femme queer couple, because let's be honest, that is one of the biggest issues that still plagues X-Men to this day. They were trying to survive. They were trying to hold together in a time when, even metafictionally, they were not allowed to be themselves because editorial oversight and comics code oversight was not allowing them to be what Chris Claremont wanted them to be, which is why he was using archaic terms like Lamon to refer to them, which is like an old term for lovers. And so like he couldn't call them lovers, but he could say things like that because it would just slip under the comics code's noses. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't realize it.
He was very good at that. Very good at making it incredibly explicit, but at the same time, not explicit. So yeah, and throughout time, we saw that Mystique Mystique is also a very gender fluid character, right? And we see that she would often, especially early on, like in the early 1900s, late 1800s, she would like go out as a man in order for them to be able to kind of fit in a little bit better. So it is interesting to see how it evolved and how the relationship changed over time and everything. And yet I think it's undeniable. Like, there's nobody, with all the different changes that happen to characters over the years, some people like, oh, that's, like when Bobby came out as gay, everybody, like not everybody, but there were a lot of people like that came out of nowhere, even though it's been in the books the whole time. I don't think anybody was surprised when Mystique called Destiny her wife. Like nobody was surprised. It was just like, yeah, they've been married forever. And
I mean, I was surprised to see it finally happen, but other than that,
yeah,
it was more surprising, like patient.
Mm-hmm. Finally, a good,
yeah.
And something you had brought up about like Krakoan morals kind of coming from the template of Mystique and Destiny is definitely something I want to see them explore more in current comics. Destiny and Mystique, they've kind of had to establish their own set of morals purely to survive. They went through being a queer couple and mutants in the early 1900s till today. There was a lot of things that they had to do, adjustments they had to make to survive, but now they don't need all of those adjustments. And on the other hand, you now have Krakoa, this fledgling nation, and there's no need for Krakoa to follow the societal morals of the human world. In the same way, in a lot of queer communities, there's no reason for queer people to necessarily follow the heteronormative morals that we were told we were supposed to. So I think it'd be very interesting to see what that life is for them now that they get the chance to make their own rules. What do they keep? What do they get rid of?
And I think also, what does it mean to be incredibly long-lived and like functionally immortal and have lived through many societal changes? I think that would really shape their moral code too in Krakoa, of this idea of this could be here tomorrow or it could be gone. But I know the one sure thing over the last century or so has been my wife. And I think that shapes a lot of Mystique's ideas of what, she should and shouldn't do. But I don't think we get a lot of Irene's ideas on kind of that same idea of like, if it comes down to the futures of mutants or the future of Raven, what would Irene pick? I think that's something that I would love to read about too. I think we get a lot of Irene seeing other people's futures, obviously, but we don't get a lot of that interiority to think of how does she feel about Krakoa? How does she feel about her wife? How does she feel about the longevity of mutant kind?
I think
Really looking forward to Immortal X-Men for that reason. I really feel like we can trust Gillen to go with that stuff.
Yeah. I feel like we got a little touch of that when Irene first came back in Inferno, and she had a moment where she really had to come to terms with the things that Raven had done when she was gone. Because, Irene really has always just been her moral compass to an extent. And without Irene, Raven did a lot of crazy things, including working for Xavier. So
and dating Forge.
Oh, Irene knew that was coming too. Irene was like, nice to him. You might end up fucking him.
Everyone makes mistakes in grief.
That's true.
True.
That's not the worst relationship that's ever happened in comics. We don't even need to get into it. But yeah, it's, she has that moment where she really has to come to terms with it, and all the things that Raven did. And I think that Irene is different now than she was after she first died, and she's a little bit, I don't know, I just think of like that moment where with Sinister, where she's like, I don't read the future, you don't have any idea how my powers work. She's not as forthcoming with things, and she's willing to kind of hold back, I guess, to her own benefit or to the benefit of mutants. We'll find out which it is. She's also Nightcrawler's mother. I want to make that clear.
100%.
Yeah. I don't know who that red guy was, but he lied. There's some drunk guy showing up at the barbecue, like, I'm your dad. No, you're not. Get the hell out. Oh my god.
That's one of the retcons I would really like to see come down is why can't we just say that he was lying?
Mm-hmm. He's the devil. Don't they call him the Prince of Lies?
I love where this conversation is going.
This is why I run a Nightcrawler podcast, because I can't help but bring it back to him every time.
Well, we are talking about his parents, so it makes sense.
That is true. Him and Rogue's parents.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so picking up on that, because I wanna make a focus now on the two different on Mystique first and on Destiny second as characters before we go back to what they mean as a couple more. Especially what they mean now and all the things that we've been talking about. So I want to talk about Mystique a little bit, and I want to ask you all about Mystique. I have a lot of thoughts. I think she's a really problematic and really interesting character, and I'm gonna make my case as we go. But I think I would love if she would have a mini-series written by a trans feminine person at some point, because she has a strong trans vibes for me. But I will make my case as we go along. So I want to ask you all about Mystique, and especially since we're doing a Pride show, about Mystique queerness. about which has various facets to it because she's also bisexual and she's also really queer coded, like really queer coded. There's a bunch of shit that she has done that is like not okay in any way, and we have to deal with that. So I want to ask you all about all of that.
I mean, I'm not a trans person, so I don't want to speak on any of that specifically. However, I think what's really fascinating about Mystique is we don't actually know who she was born as. We don't know anything. All we know is what she's told us. We know that she has claimed the name Raven Darkholm. We don't even know if that's her real name. So she's one of those characters where it doesn't matter what her history is. She is exactly who she's presenting to you in the moment, and I think that's really powerful.
I want to go a little bit into that. Oh wait, no.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's very much it's the concept of chosen identity. You know, I am who I choose to be. I am not necessarily who I was born as. It's the idea that you can define yourself based on your lifestyle, based on your actions, based on your life choices, based on the company you keep. And in Mystique, it is perfectly exemplified because it is it's down in her DNA. It's every single molecule of her being is constantly in flux. Thank you, Othello. Hello. My cat has come for attention.
Oh, my dog was whining a bit earlier. I don't know if anyone heard it.
And that's a big deal. Like you say, we only know that Raven Darkholm is the name that she took. We only know what she gives us. And I think especially with her in this prominent role, because this was a thing that magnified Wolverine and made him so popular for such a long time, was this idea that nobody knew his actual history. The idea that the only thing we had was this piecemeal Weapon X thing that Barry Windsor Smith did. And it was very intentionally kind of mildly incoherent and confusing and feverish. And it gave the character, who was already this very like straight male machismo stereotype, this kind of mystery that made him magnetic in terms of storytelling and in terms of popularity. And I think that going with the option, like, I get why they did it from a marketing standpoint to explain his origin and story and everything. I get why they did it, but I think it was the wrong choice. And I think that Mystique gets to occupy that role now because everything we have is just what she gives us. And I really hope that they just let her keep having that. And I think that the current engine of Krakoan Resurrection and combined with the time compression that comes with comics being an ongoing serial over decades, gives a lot of latitude for that to just continue. Because she can always be like, yeah, I was there. Yeah, I was there. And sure, okay. Why wasn't she? Why couldn't she be?
I think that's fascinating. And I think an idea, I mean, someone could write a backstory for Mystique and then it's not outside of Mystique's character to like several years later be like, oh, that was a lie. So
yeah, I want a series of Mystique in random places and then we find out it's a lie 10 years down the line.
I would love a mini of just multiple possible origins for Mystique, just like a 5-issue mini, 5 different origins, and one of them could be true, none of them could be true.
Oh yeah,
maybe all of them are true, and just leave it at that.
I love that idea. That's brilliant. And I like the idea of her just showing up in different parts of history. Like, remember that picture that was a meme a while ago of like a time traveler in the 20s in a Charlie Chaplin movie? It's like, no, that was me. I'm just screwing around.
Yeah, especially since we don't necessarily know if there's identities in the past that she lived in for the same length of time as she's lived in this Raven identity. Like, I would be interested in knowing how many discarded long-term identities Mystique just has in her wake. I don't know. It's really fascinating, and I think it allows also for some of the bad writing that Mystique has had and some of the out of character moments. You can kind of spell those away in a lot of ways as someone who's long lived, or someone who was in grief, or even as someone we don't know if that was Mystique at all. Like, I think there's so many ways when you have that much mystery to kind of retcon things. And I think that's why she's continued to be such a popular character. One of the reasons is that anytime I feel like they've stumbled with the character, the next person can come in and kind of wipe the slate clean pretty easily, because there's that grayness around who she is.
Her identity is flux. Like, it's not in flux, it is flux.
And
I just want to. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll say one last thing, quick. I just want to say something about Mystique and Femininity specifically, because she's a character that has bucked every traditional like feminine role as like the mother and the wife and all of those things. But she's also a character that doesn't get held against her, like a lot of other characters do, which is, I don't know why, but I think that's very interesting too.
So
I think it's just because she's really cool.
That's probably, yeah.
I think it boils down to that.
If a blue baby comes out of me today, I'll throw it off a cliff too. So.
You had mentioned the comparison to Logan with how they both had these mysterious pasts, and I think that there was a big difference between the two is in itself kind of inherently queer, in that for Logan, his lack of identity was seen as a weakness to kind of make him more endearing to readers, wherein for Mystique, her lack of identity, which is really just only her chosen identity, is kind of like a sense of power.
Would you say that it adds to her mystique?
Aha. I don't remember, and maybe it's just me that I've misread, but I don't remember people ever challenging Mystique on being Raven, on being Mystique. It's something that I think all the other characters have just taken at her word, and I think there is a sense of power that is inherently queer in kind of like a wish fulfillment way of being able to introduce yourself and people just being like, yes, that is who you are because you say it is who you are, and that is it.
I think a big difference there is Mystique chose her identity, whereas Logan had his taken from him. So she's not in search of anything. She knows who she is.
Yes. One thing that's, and like my memory is a little fuzzy on this point. I know she was using Raven Darkholme specifically as a cover identity when she was infiltrating the government around messing around with Val Cooper and things like that. Was she using that full name Raven Darkholme prior to that? Or was that originally a cover identity and then later writers just kind of made that her name?
I'm not sure, actually.
That's one of those things. I'm gonna have to look this up afterwards, because that's really curious to me. And like you said, everything about chosen identity and stuff like that. Like, what if people just started using that name and she was like, all right, yeah, fine.
Sounds
So
good.
are you asking if like they used it in like real world chronologically or like in comic canon chronologically?
So in comic canon, I know that they established it as being her name in other places through flashback stories and stuff like that. I'm wondering if that name was used for her in the comics prior to her using it as her posing in the government.
I don't think so, but my memory is very hazy on older comics.
Yeah, this is absolutely one of those things where like it benefits me as a writer, because I can just go look these things up and then write about it like I knew it the whole time.
We're all experts when Google's involved.
We're all one wiki away.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I wanted to piggyback on something of all of this, and it's that aside from the fact that she chose the name, that she chose to be called Raven Dogholm, there's also one fascinating theme for me about Mystique is that it's implied that she chose her form, that he chose the blue form that we're used to see. It's implied in various comics that that's part of her mutation, but also something she's comfortable with, like part of how she wants to present to the world. And that's something that adds to all what I was gonna like explain a little bit more before is that we definitely don't know the assigned gender of Mystique at birth. That's totally like we don't know that, and in the intended purposes of how things happened, of how things should have happened, if Claremont would have the like if the comics code wasn't there, Mystique and Destiny were gonna be like the parents, the mothers of Kurt, the biological mothers, because Rogue is adopted, but Kurt would be. So Mystique was gonna impregnate Destiny, and that is strongly implied either like a trans or intersex identity within Mystique, which is something that I think it's hinted at in various moments by various different writers in the comics. Like, as much as I have my issues with Brian K. Vaughan's Mystique run, because it has like a lot of problematic things, and a lot of them are within the queer coding of Mystique, and she does a bunch of shit that could be massive trigger warning, could be like there's rape involved in that comic, there's a lot of things happening, but there's one moment that I really like, and that is when Mystique finds she's like on some run trying to like do some work for Savior. I don't know, I the main story is not my strong point here, but she finds a trans woman and she has like a fight with that trans woman because she wants to put some information out of her, but she realized the trans woman doesn't have the information. So there's some moment in which Mystique realizes she's a trans woman, which is made in some really like the writing is some really like on the nose. It's very dated, but when Mystique realizes that person is a trans woman, she lets her go, and she decides not to kill her, which is a choice that is not explained anywhere else in that comic, and that alongside other things that happen within Mystique relating to other gender non-conforming characters, and especially when she has to deal with characters that are confused about their gender or sexuality, she's very comprehensive of them, which implies that there's something that she has gone through and that is long in the past, but has to do with her identity, which is why I always have read Mystique as trans, which is a massive problematic take because we don't have a lot of trans characters, and she's a incredibly queer-coded character, but I have a lot of care for her, so I wish that could be explored more, especially now that we're getting Mystique to a point where she's not like villain that does terrible things all the time anymore. She's way more complex now. She was way more complex in Claremont's run also, but she has gone through a lot of years of being just like, this is the character you put in a comic when you want to kill someone or like trick someone into something or whatever. Like, I mean, there's the Sabretooth story with Crayon Kid that is not pleasant to read, and it doesn't make a good light of Mystique. So my headcanon, I wish it became canon, but it would have to have like a lot of damage control around it, because it's also grappling with the fact that trans and queer people can also be horrible, and that's something that I feel like not a lot of comics are ready to like grapple with. So yeah.
Well, that's a big thing, because it's like, absolutely, you can find trans people who are abusive. You can find queer people who are abusive. You can find these people who, like, their transness or their queerness or whatever is not related to the fact that they are also terrible people. Like, that exists. And I think that when comics aren't ready to grapple with that, and when any media really isn't ready to grapple with that, is because those characters are presented by straight creative teams who only present trans and queer characters in a certain way, who only present villains as queer coded, who only present, like, if they're queer and they're not villains, then they get killed off. They only know one way to depict marginalized people. And it's difficult because we do want complicated characters. We do want characters who are allowed to be trans and be villains, who are allowed to be, lesbians and villains. We want those characters. However, we want something other than that once in a while. And we have only had that. And, well, only is me being a little hyperbolic. We do have Jessie Drake, who was really just a victim in her entire 2-issue run of Marvel Comics Presents. She was just along for the ride. But in terms of Raven, I agree that, like, I've always read her very much as trans. In fact, she's like the personification of that joke, that identification joke, which is like, are you a man or a woman? I identify as a threat. Like, that's Raven in a nutshell. Because I very much read in her someone who, whatever she went through prior to becoming the Raven that we know, whatever she learned or whatever she was taught, she came away with it with the knowledge that identity is mutable, and that who she is not the same as who people see her. And she uses that to her advantage in every waking moment. It's kind of one of the reasons why I always love the Raven and Rogue connection, because this is a thing that Claremont is very good at, which is powers as metaphor. Mystique is a character whose powers are to superficially assume any identity. She can look like anything. She has a stepdaughter or an adopted daughter whose powers are that she can become anyone while still looking like herself, because she absorbs their memories and their identity and their personality through touch. And the entire reason that those two are together is because of that contrast. It's because of the difference between those two viewpoints. And it's also why they were doomed to have that split, why they were doomed to, why Rogue was intended to go towards the X-Men. Like, that was the fracture point between them, because fundamentally they are looking at the question of identity from two opposing angles. And they were never going to see eye to eye on that, which is why one of my favorite scenes with them is when Mystique, like, sneaks into the mansion and tranks Xavier and is like, goes to Rogue like, I'm here to rescue you. And Rogue's like, no, I'm not going. I don't want to go. I like Mystique as a trans character because she is allowed to be complicated, and not just complicated, but flawed. She is allowed to make mistakes and have decisions that are purely based in her personal desires blow up in her face. And she's allowed to continue on from that and learn from that and adjust. And she fundamentally remains the same person that she was back then because she still is willing to go that distance for anyone that is important to her, for that she cares about. You can't look at that Rogue thing and not compare it against Mystique being ready to burn down Krakoa for Destiny. Like that idea that her identity is not linked to what people perceive her as. Her identity is linked to the things that she finds important, the people that she finds important in her life, is intrinsic to the character. And it's one of the reasons why I love a trans read of her, because nobody gets to tell me who I am except me. I don't care. Like, I am a very non-conforming trans woman. I do not look like a trans woman in the traditional sense that people like to think of. I have balding hair. I am pushing 40, and I don't wear wigs because I am not interested in that kind of performative femininity. I know who I am. I know what is important to me in my life. And that is the thing that I find most gratifying about Mystique.
I want to say that Claremont did intend her to be a trans woman early on, but I don't know that I can actually back that up with anything, except that he wrote her as a man in Exiles that one time. I don't know if anyone read his very brief stint on Exiles. It was not very good, but he did make a point specifically in that book to bring in an alternate universe Raven Darkholm who presents male specifically. So I thought that was an interesting take on the character. And I felt like that was his way of almost being like, no, those gender reads you're getting for Mystique are legit. Like, they're meant to be there.
And I mean, we can only speculate on that because, like, Claremont hasn't said on record, I intended Mystique as a trans woman. But we know that the comics writing community that was around at that era was very, like, Ann Nocenti and Louise Simonson and Chris and all those people were very, like, conscious about the fact that trans people existed in their lives also. Because Louise Simonson was married to Catherine Jeffrey Jones, who was a trans woman, who was friends with Chris Claremont. So, like, there's that, and there's the aspect of, like, them also wanting to make queer comics, like them reading queer theory. Like, Claremont read a lot of Judith Butler and wanted to put a lot of that into his work. He was as much a social studies person as he was a comics writer. So there's, like, a strong basis for that. We don't have, like, the words, but we have a strong basis that the era it was created around and the people who were involved were very, like, conscious that that we exist. But yeah, what were you gonna say, Nala?
Oh, I was just mentioning you were talking about how it was Claremont and Louise and Nocenti all in that same era, and it was Annie Nocenti who wrote that Marvel Comics story about Jesse Drake.
Yeah, exactly.
Who wrote that panel that was like, no, but I am a girl. And that was just to see that exist in 1989, or maybe it was in 91, somewhere in there. Like, to see that exist so long ago. And gosh, I miss that adventurism, that willingness to push boundaries and things like that existed.
Yeah, so, like, it's not, like, as much as it's also a reading that can be done, like, as a reader, I'm pretty sure that there was some intent in the writer's part, at least to put Raven in a position of querying her identity. But like the whole thing about her being Nightcrawler's mom, Nightcrawler's biological mom, while being Rose's adoptive mom, also has that same like vibe I get from those stories, even if it was aborted and changed later. But yes, I don't know if anyone has anything other to add about Mystique, or we can go over to Destiny.
We love her. She's perfect.
The one thing I was going to say, because you referenced that there is kind of an aspect of problematic with doing a trans reading of Mystique, and I think that boils down to simply there not really being any other options. That if they canonize that Mystique is trans, it kind of gives us a grand whopping total of one headlining trans person in the entirety of the X-Men universe. We have Jesse Drake, who made a brief appearance in the Pride issue last year and then vanished again. And we have Vita Ayala's best attempts at giving us new mutants who are trans, but no one has picked up that ball to go any further with it. So they're kind of still floating in the background. So it kind of makes it so that way it's like if you want to root for a trans X-Men, you have to root for the multiple mass murderer. And love Mystique, but give me options.
Girls got issues.
Yeah. And I know that they are finally introducing another trans mutant, and escapade something. There we go. And I believe the idea is for her to take some spotlight, but I've learned to hold my hope a little close to the chest there. Hopefully,
and like that becomes part of that age-old debate where it's like, well, if you want these characters, you have to make your own. Don't change the existing ones. But at the same time, these existing characters, these headlining characters, are the headlining characters. They're the ones that people are looking at. So if you go make your own, there's no guarantee that anyone's going to pay attention to them or that they're going to be touched afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't, and maybe things have changed with Krakoa, but I think that the only new X-mutant who gained real traction in the past almost decade was Gabby Kinney. Every other new mutant was introduced, is held by their writer, and then nothing. So introducing new characters, it doesn't have that traction that an existing character would. So even if they had other mutants come out as trans as well, and I think there are some that have been coded as such, I think that will loosen the fact that we only have the one option, the mass murderer Mystique, and her being trans becomes less complicated for the fandom.
Yeah, I can see that argument. That's why I really want Mystique to be trans, but I also know that in the current realm of Marvel, that has complicated consequences, which they would need to address. Because like, yay for Mystique being trans, because like she's trans to me already. Like, I mean that is already working with a lot of trans fans. It's just that we don't get the confirmation in the text, but we already know it. But we also need other characters to not have only Mystique with her complicated history, which thankfully it's getting to a better place. Like right now, if Mystique were to be like I'm trans in like a couple of years, maybe it's way better than it would have been like 10 years ago, because the character has had growth.
That's what I was going to say. I think Krakoa era has kind of shown they're all shades of terrible and shades of gray on that island. So I think it makes it a little easier for characters like Raven to exist in that complexity and it not feel like a caricature or like a slap in the face, because everyone, at least on the Quiet Council, has compromised morals and terrible things they've done in the past, except for Kurt, maybe.
Thank you.
I got you, Lisa. But he's a cop now, so I mean, depending on how you feel. So I think that kind of helps a lot too. Even with the wife moment, like I felt, I think, a lot more positively about that moment than I maybe would have even 5 years ago with a character like Raven. Just because Krakoa era has really complicated what good and evil and like what great representation or bad representation really looks like, specifically for X-Men characters.
Well, and that ties back to what we were talking about at the beginning too, with the idea of Krakoan amnesty. The idea that what you do to survive in a world that is actively trying to exterminate you, like, can be forgiven, even if it seems horrible, because again, the world is trying to exterminate you. It's so much beyond just living in the world and getting a bad deal. It's like everything that we see Mystique doing is in response to literally the world powers launching these huge, far-reaching fascistic plans to wipe out mutants, to corral mutants. Like, we see all of the different multiple futures where they succeed at that. We see all of this stuff, and it's not subtle. It's very much, that's what that is. I was flipping through a book the other day, and right around the time of Fall of the Mutants, there was a house ad that was like it was a play on the old commercials. Those like 10 o'clock commercials. It was like, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? There was a house ad for X-Men that was like, do you know what your kids are? And it was very much like, it's an anti-mutant thing, but it plays on the fact that understanding that those commercials were like a community policing thing. It was based very much on that kind of thing, that kind of bigotry and fear. And when you live in a world that is hitting you from every angle, when you live in a world where you cannot go outside and, go to the store safely with a reasonable expectation of safety, all cards are on the table, all bets are off. You do what you need to survive. And, we, like, as fans of queer characters, I think that we very much kind of jokingly are like, yeah, they're terrible, I love them. Because that's what we get. We get the villains a lot of the time. And so we kind of like laughingly lean into that. But also, Mystique especially is one of those characters where, yeah, she's done horrible things. She's done it for reasons of survival. And you cannot ignore that when weighing her actions in the moral balance.
Mm-hmm. She's also someone, because of the length of her life, I mean, she's seen more heartache and hardship than anyone else. I think you can liken her a lot to Magneto, whereas Magneto, his character is very much inferred by or instructed by like his time in the Holocaust. And I think of how many types of events Mystique saw like that in her lifetime. And I could see her, it just, you get to a point where you're just like tired of asking and you just start taking. And, that's what she's been doing, is she's just, I can't imagine having lived over a century and being like, wow, we've only moved half a step forward in the century. Okay, I'm done waiting, and just, start taking stuff into your own hands.
And looking at that, especially through a lens of being alive in the early 1900s, like being like, because Irene is that Irene Adler. That was always Claremont's joke, was like, she's that Irene Adler. And so like those two being around in that time and then living through both world wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, like the Prohibition era, to all of the different crackdowns in the 40s and 50s, to seeing the 60s and the Summer of Love and all of that. And then to have her come out with that lens, to have her appear in the 80s as an active anti-government, anti-fascistic operative during the Reagan era and during the AIDS crisis, during the Republican crackdown on queer identities in the 80s specifically. Like, that's such a big component of why she is who she is. Of course you would be tired. Of course you would be done trying to play along.
Oh, yeah.
You can tell I get excited because I'm like...
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was like, I'm too busy dealing with mutant rights. I can't take care of this baby.
Yeet.
Mutants need me, except my son. Yeet.
Okay. Anyone has any other thoughts on Mystique before we pass to Destiny? Okay, I guess it's Destiny time.
Our other mother.
Yes, our other mother. Okay, so Destiny, who didn't throw anyone off a cliff, but
that we know of. That we know of. She could have chucked someone.
She knew it was coming, so she's basically like an accessory to throwing him off a cliff.
Okay, so there's some stuff with Destiny specifically that is a little bit different. Like, there's some ways in which representation in Destiny works different, and she visibly ages, as opposed to Mystique, who didn't age since the Sherlock Holmes years. And she is also a visibly disabled character, and she's blind, and she has like also a power that in some way can be related to her disability, which now looking back at it has some problematic issues as well that we can talk about it, because she doesn't see, but she sees the future, she has power, so like that's also part of her character. And most importantly, or I think one of the things that I carry more around with her, is that she has a plan for mutant kind to be safe, and she wants that, and that's how she plans everything, regardless to her decisions. So what do you all think of Mystique, this old queer lady who's also visibly old and who's disabled and who we love and who's a badass? She can fight like no one. So yeah, Destiny.
I mean, as someone approaching 40, I just love old representation. So Golden Girls all the way.
When it comes to Destiny, I'll be honest, I have a very rose-colored glasses view of her because I came to comics after she was already dead. So Destiny was always just this like old lesbian in an ugly costume who was somehow really good with a crossbow despite being blind, and that is the extent of my Destiny knowledge, aside from what she means to Mystique.
Yeah, for like an 80-year-old, she had nice legs, let me say.
Yeah, incredible legs.
Yeah.
So
I take some issue with ugly costume. I take some issue with that, but
iconic.
We'll let it go to we'll let it fall away to personal tastes.
So that being said, aside from her bad fashion choices, I was able.
Okay, girl's blind. All right, give her some credit. I mean, she's not as bad as Kitty.
No one is as bad as Kitty.
And Kitty can see, so.
So I'm able to forgive most of what she might have done that was bad because I've learned about all of the bad things she's done after I learned about all the badass aspects of her, including the fact that it's just ever since I started reading comics, it's just been known that she was supposed to be queer and they just couldn't put it on the panel. And like other people have been saying, it's like we learn to forgive a lot about our queer characters because we don't have much choice about it.
Yeah, I think Destiny, because she was dead and out of publication for so long, she managed to escape a lot of the icky stuff that happened to Raven in the time that she was gone, especially the 2010s, the early 2000s. I think she got to get held at a standard that Mystique never really has seen in her publication history, which is really great for the character because now that they've brought her back, she doesn't have a lot of that baggage that Mystique has, quite frankly. She can be held in a different light because she was gone for so long. But I think that also is because, to something we were talking about a little earlier, I think Destiny as a character is always outward facing. We hear a lot about how Destiny feels about others or about the future. Even her mask is used as a mirror to see, you see yourself in her. So I'm interested to really get into the interior of Destiny because even as someone who's read quite a bit of her, I don't know if I know her in the same way that I know Raven. I don't know if I know necessarily what activates Irene, what worries her, what upsets her, beyond don't hurt her wife or her kids. So yeah, that's I think what I'm looking forward to. I'm glad that she was resurrected in a time where we're digging into that nuance, specifically in women in comics. I think we'll be able to see a lot more of that complexity and depth now than if maybe she had been resurrected a decade ago or 5 years ago, even. Um, so yeah, I think that's what's most exciting about the character is how much they can add to her and how much more complexity they can give the character now that she's back with her family and Mutants' like best chance at surviving all of the stuff that's been happening to them the last couple decades.
Yeah, I find that very exciting. Destiny has always been like one of my favorites, partly because of the fact that she saw her death coming, partly because like her story was so contained, and maybe just because she wasn't around after that for such a long time. Because, like you say, when characters are around and part of things, like it affects it. Like Destiny has the advantage of having not been part of all of these awful things that went on, which means also on a metafictional level that she has the advantage of not having been diluted by all of these events, not having her, forgive me, her mystique diluted by all of these events. And I'm very interested to see what being back means for her because we get to explore that interiority. And we get to see those things that make up who she is. And like we know that as a precog, she's very focused on what will happen, and she's very focused on protecting the people that matter to her. We know that she's very, very wry and very arch with people in often hilarious manners. That scene with the cuckoos, just so good. And that's not the first time that she's been that way either. She's got that very like, I know what, like it's part of her power. It's I know what you're doing or what you're going to say before you say it. And she lets herself be a little bit smug about that in verbal sparring, and it's fun. It's just fun. And I think that's one of the reasons why she, even though she wasn't around for very long, was such a huge influence on me as a kid, because not only was she part of Mystique and part of this queer couple, but she was funny. She was mean and funny in like this great way that you're like, okay, yeah, sometimes a character needs to be the bitch.
I totally agree. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a bitch. I love a bitch. As Tina Fey said, bitches get shit done. So, bitch pride. But, I always call her like the Sophia Petrillo, not to go back on the Golden Girls thing, because she's got that like witty tongue, and like she has those biting, things to say all the time. And I remember we did an episode recently on the issue where she and Gambit had a little going back and forth. And I mean, one of the things that she said that I was like, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember exactly, but it was something like, Gambit, if I had known my daughter was going to marry you, I would have just killed myself all over again. It's like, girl. I mean, that is brutal, but it was great, and it was so fun to see how she's interacting now in this world that she's not been a part of for such a long time, but yet knew was coming, right? So I actually have one quick question for everybody. How does everybody feel about her coming back in a young body?
I have complicated feelings on it.
Okay, same.
I understand the problem of it, because she was a representation of an older character, a character who had lived through things, and who was allowed to be old and like an old woman, which is very much, you are allowed to be an old man and accrue grace and wisdom and complicated histories. Women are very much in media portrayed as younger and younger and younger. And there is a very, like, it's that idea that after a certain age, women don't have something to offer because they're no longer young and sexy and whatever. And just Destiny very much existed in defiance of that, whether intentionally or not. She still occupied that space. And I don't like making her young for that reason. However, a girl is alive again in a new age, and I also support her being allowed to live a life where mutants are thriving and have a body where she's allowed to do that.
I agree with that. I agree. My biggest issue was from how it was framed when in the issue, Mystique was like, "Oh, this was a gift for both of us. I'm giving you your young body." And it's like, as if she didn't kiss every damn wrinkle on that body when she was 80 years old. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't like the implication that Mystique preferred her young body, because I think
Yes.
Mystique, like Destiny's mind could have been transferred into a dog, and suddenly Mystique loves dogs. Mystique loved Destiny no matter what she looked like.
Yeah.
I do think that, like, in the narrative of you being able to be brought back at whatever you want, it makes sense in the narrative, but at the same time, it goes back to that same issue of when we only have limited representation, it's so easy to fuck it up. So if we had a wealth of badass, powerful women, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But since Destiny was kind of one of the very few ones we had, if not the only one, because I'm blanking on others at this point in time, it kind of makes it a lot more
Yeah. Old women typically are alternate future type stories, and they don't get, like, I mean, to go back to Logan again. Logan was allowed to have an old man version of himself transported to the present and just running around while the prime version of him was dead. Women don't get that.
We got it with Wanda for like one issue, but
Yeah. And I think we got it with Laura for like one issue at the end of her all new Wolverine run. Mm-hmm. We got an old lady, Laura. The other thing that I would like to see explored is the idea that maybe Irene just has some insecurities about that. Maybe when she made that choice as a gift for Raven, she was feeling insecure about her age and about her body. And maybe I would like to see a conversation about that between the two of them. I would like to see, some kind of like you were saying, Caleb, the interiority, like something about Irene that isn't activated, like that isn't just fighting for mutants and fighting specifically for the mutants that are in her family. Like, what are her insecurities? What are her likes and dislikes? What is she when she's not Destiny?
But I mean, the choice was made by Raven, so that's what, I think that's what the problematic aspect is too, because Raven did that, and we without really Irene's consent, I can see why that is problematic. I really like it because I was like, let the lesbians be horny, but that's like my instant reaction was like, this is great because like we don't get like sexual queerness in comic ever, like ever. But now that you all frame like this, I would have loved if they had stayed horny, but she could be old. Because like those things are not mutually exclusive.
No,
They
old
could
people get
be.
horny. Trust. Old people.
They
Yes.
Get
absolutely do.
Also,
Yes.
I think it also could have been solved by having more of that introspection, because there is also the factor that I don't think either Mystique or Destiny are going to have faith that Krakoa is going to be a forever thing. So if she brings back Destiny and Destiny is 80, 90 years old, there's already a ticking clock on how long.
Yeah.
But if she brings her back in her mid-20s, her early 30s, I don't know how old she's supposed to
Yeah.
be because comic books, then at least that means that if Krakoa crumbles, at least they still have a lifetime ahead of them, barring, Sentinels or evil
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
toads. I
That
don't know what's coming up next.
I
that
think for a
aspect is
collective
very
point. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
no, that aspect is very clear because Destiny ages. So she would die at some point. So that is very understandable. That is very understandable. Uh, but yeah, but like how I read it, like the gift for them, that seemed like a horny joke at the moment. Like so yeah, if it would make more clear that it was so we have more time later, then I would have like not seen it as problematic with your arguments. But
I
like
would have loved to see like a talk with the Five where Mystique's like, bring her back at 80, and the Five's like, or we bring her back younger, so we don't have to be bringing her back every 5 years. How about, like, we can't give you a punch card for your wife, guy. I mean, come on.
And I can
And-
actually see Hope and Proteus specifically being like, I don't want to have to resurrect Destiny every week. Can we maybe have her younger?
Yeah, I
And
know.
if you think
which
about how
unlocks a whole conversation about ageism too, because
That's true.
there is very much this thing where in real life, like past a certain age, it becomes harder to get new jobs, it becomes harder to get employment, it becomes harder to get things like that because companies are looking at you from the viewpoint of, well, how long can we exploit this particular person's labor? And the older you are, the less time they can get from you. And so the less inclined they are to hire you. And so that idea that you can just bring somebody back young in Krakoa and that the Five might have an opinion on that and might want, like, have preferences. Like, does that affect the actual process? Do they get a say? Who gets a say? And we know that, like, we know from Quentin Quire that you can put in requests for modifications in your own resurrections. Who is the arbiter of those requests? How do they get implemented? How secure is the process? How much can be changed between resurrections without your knowledge? We also know that, like, things can be done mid-resurrection without your knowledge. Domino is an example of that, because, like, Colossus specifically defied Domino's wishes when he brought her back for resurrection early on in X-Force. And so those changes can be made without your consent. And the level to which I am curious about how the Five's personal opinions might affect that, the level to which I'm curious about surviving lovers' personal opinions might affect that. Like, what is... There's a conversation about that, or multiple conversations about that need to happen, I think.
And I think that there are actually multiple avenues, because not only do we have Mystique resurrecting Destiny at a younger age, we also have Dakin resurrecting Somus Sumnus, whatever his name is, at a much younger age, because he had died an old man and now he's back young again. And these are conversations that Sumnus and Destiny were not a part of. And especially now that Wanda has opened the floodgates of every mutant ever being able to be resurrected, now there's going to be a lot more options of mutants who have died of old age without ever interacting, being able to come back. But how do they come back? And I don't think there would be anyone available other than the 5 to make those decisions.
Well, it's
So
also
it
like
does-
how and why, right? I mean, if someone died 500 years ago, should you bring them back?
Like,
All
what
the
if they
questions
don't want
we
to
don't
come
get to
back
see.
too?
That's the other thing. I remember there was talk about a character who had committed suicide. I don't remember if they actually brought him back. Was that that wasn't Somnus? No.
No. I don't think there's been conversation in panel, but I've seen a lot of fan conversations about Larry Bodine?
Yeah, it was some character like
he had committed suicide, and it was an emotional storyline for Kitty Pryde.
Yes.
Way back in the day. But I think that the writers have steered clear of having that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of fan speculation about that kind of idea where, but you're bringing him back into a world that he can live in, but we don't know all of his motivations for, there's just, it's, how do you make those decisions, and who's the one who's allowed to make them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element too where Mystique resurrected Destiny in a way that was not by the books. She had to go through all of these clandestine methods to get Irene back. And I wonder if that plays a role in it too, of there might not be a second time for Destiny to be resurrected. So let me bring her back as young and whatever as I need to, because there's no promise that Xavier or anyone will allow me to have this opportunity again. I think now the doors.
So
exactly. There was no opportunity. She took the opportunity, and there was no guarantee. And I think now there's much more surety because of the waiting room and things like that, where Destiny could put herself in the queue and things like that. But none of that existed when Destiny was resurrected the first time.
Even then, like with things being different now that she's already back, in the ending of Inferno, Destiny flat out said that if they stepped out of line, she would not be coming back, and that Magneto and Xavier would have done everything to prolong it and stop it. So even now, with her having a seat on the Quiet Council, it's still a little bit up in the air about if something happens to Destiny. Will she be back? When will she be back? So her not dying is probably a very big priority for everyone who cares.
It's true.
But I do really miss the idea of a badass older woman as an active participant, especially with a power like a precog. They're usually left on the sidelines, or the wise information giver. And I just always loved that Destiny not only served that role, but she also got to be in the battles and had a stake in everything that was going on.
Yeah, she could have been like an oracle behind the scenes, just kind of, helping out. But she was like, no, I get me in there. I'm going to kick some ass.
Mm-hmm. With a crossbow.
Yeah, I really like the idea of her kind of fulfilling that Cyclops role for the Brotherhood during that era, is being their tactical field leader, calling out orders and shots and things like that, because she can see the moves. Okay. Which is a whole different conversation, because that's two different takes on people with optical disabilities, who are the people who call the shots.
You just blew my mind. I never even made that connection.
Yeah.
Okay. So we stay on topic. I have two more. Yeah, I have two more questions for you all. I have three actually, but I'm trying to put two in one. Okay, so these two that I'm gonna put in one is no, okay, I go first with the other one because we're gonna chat about that for a while. Yeah. Okay, so about motherhood in these characters, we haven't talked about that a lot. And I think there's like a really wholesome example in how they're represented as like this sapphic couple, like I'm not taking the word in English right now, but like racing Rogue. I think that's a really, really like that's really important part of the representation of these characters. And at the same time, we have Mystique, who has repeatedly been a terrible mother to various people, throwing off cliffs and just abandoning childs because like they're not mutants and etc etc etc. So what do you all think about this? And then I'll get to the last question.
I'll say
I-
that. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think it's funny that Rogue called both characters mom on panel many times, and still people were like, they're just friends. So that's kind of funny because that was just another clue that they were obviously in a relationship and not just, two buds raising a kid together. But I mean,
Just
I have a
gal
lot to say.
pals.
Yeah, just gal pals. I mean, I have like several babies with my gal pals. I mean, who doesn't, right?
Just raising some babies platonically with my
Yeah,
bestie.
some of them we throw off cliffs, some of them we give trauma for life. We just have a great time. Yeah, I just thought that was a funny thing that she's always calling them both mother. Like she calls them each mom, and it's like, oh no, but they're not together. I mean, I have a lot to say about Kurt, so I'll wait till we get to the Kurt side though.
So I really want them to focus on the family aspect, since that is such a huge aspect of how Krakoa is formed. Like Magneto has the island of M, or House of M, or whatever his section of the island is, and then you have the Summers family house with their collective boyfriend Wolverine up on the moon, and Mystique and Destiny's family is just so unbelievably messy. I would love, now that Destiny is back, there to be a section of the island for like Destiny and Mystique and Nightcrawler and Rogue and Gambit and Sabretooth when he crawls out of the pit, and maybe get Gaten Creed back since he's technically alive again, and just plop him in the middle of Mutant Island and see his head explode. And Blindfold, I think, is Destiny's grandchild.
There's something there. I don't
So
know.
she
There's something
she can
there.
move on to that corner of the island and bring Legion, because he never leaves her alone for 2 seconds. And I think that it would just be a good old gay old time that I need to see on panel.
House of D.
That, you know what, it works.
So the interesting thing about those two as mothers too is I always read Destiny very much more as the maternal character. And it's true that they're both Rogue's moms and they're both Kurt's moms. But I always read Destiny as much more the archetypical mother in that situation, because it's very interesting that for all that we talk about doing what you need to survive in a society that's trying to kill you, the one of the few things that Mystique did that is really inexcusable is the way that she manipulated Rogue as a child. Because the thing is Rogue called her mom and she said that Rogue was her adopted daughter, but in those early portrayals, Mystique was very manipulative, very abusive, very, if you loved me, you would do this. And it was very much meant to be a controlling, manipulative kind of thing that kind of then took on a life of its own and said, well, okay, why did Rogue end up with Mystique when she ran away from home? Why does she keep going back to Mystique and keep calling her mother despite this very, very blatant abuse and manipulation that she was subjected to as a child? Because that's the thing, is that Mystique, is a terrible mom, not just to Rogue, but to Kurt and to Graydon and to, like, she's not a good mother. And I think that that's a very interesting aspect of her character, in that she is allowed to have this flaw, and her kids are adults and have, if not forgiven her, made their kind of peace with that aspect of her. I don't know if I have a place that I'm going with this. It's just interesting to me that Mystique is allowed to occupy this space as a mother, when her portrayals of such, the only time she was actively being a mothering influence on someone's life, the only baby that she didn't abandon or chuck off of a cliff, is the one that she adopted in the form of recruiting her into her supervillain organization and manipulating her into attempting assassinations.
I mean, I think we're supposed to read Mystique as a terrible mother.
Yeah.
There's that great panel. It's one of my favorite panels of Mystique ever, from Second Coming, where she's holding baby Hope and she says, "I'm very good with children." And it's just, it's clearly not supposed to be serious. You're not supposed to take her serious that she's good with children. I mean, she's tried to kill almost every child she's had.
She's great with children. Her aim is fantastic.
Oh yeah, no. You can get her baby in that 500 on skee ball. So, but and I don't know. I feel like the writers are not giving enough. Like you say that her children have come to terms with her. I don't think so. I think it's more that the writers are not really dealing with it and they're just kind of ignoring it. There's that whole scene in Inferno that I was sure was going to lead to a story because it was so ridiculous and made no sense, and yet it led nowhere, where Kurt is like, "Well, Mom, it'll make you happy if I say yes, so I'm going to say yes." And it's like, hold on, when has Kurt ever wanted to make Mystique happy? Like, that makes no sense to me that he would decide to resurrect Destiny to make Mystique happy. You could come up with 1,000 other reasons he would decide to resurrect Destiny that have nothing to do with Mystique. So, yeah, I feel like a lot of writers are just skirting around it and they just don't want to deal with it. So they kind of just are like, these characters are all related and they have something to do with each other and they have this relationship. So we'll kind of we'll touch it, but we're not actually going to delve into the fact that, she has abandoned her children over and over and over again. And the one child she kept, she traumatized over and over and over again.
Well, I think that's a through line of Krakoa era. Like, you have Monet, who is suddenly okay with being Penance, and you have Akihiro, who suddenly accepted his dad and is no longer angry at him. So I think along with that idea of amnesty that we were talking about earlier, there's this idea that a lot of these relationships are kind of just reset, and we're expected to take characters at where they are right now, which I'm kind of on either side about. I think it makes it easier to read and easier to build new stories without having to go back and wrap up all the loose ends that have never been wrapped up appropriately. But I think you also lose a lot of that texture and color that comes from these kids don't necessarily like their mom, but she keeps ending up in their orbit for whatever reason. She's a terrible mother who still wants to pop up and have a say in what they do or don't do and how they live their lives. And I think we have, to your point, Lisa, lost a lot of that because we're in this kind of reset for clarity and for cleanliness. And I think having a mini or even a story or two where we kind of just have them lay it all out there would help to make a lot of these decisions make a lot more sense. Like, to your point, why would Kurt vote anything on behalf of Mystique? I think that's a cool story to tell that we just might not get in this era because of that clean cut.
That's a good point.
Make it a miniseries, call it Mrs. and Mrs. X.
Yeah, give it to us.
I would sell my soul to Kurt's father in order to get an anthology that is just Krakoan families and how they're dealing with Krakoa. Like, M-Plate's roaming around Krakoa, and so is M and her Penance siblings, which is a whole thing. And Mystique and Destiny and their family, and everyone just Wolverine and Dakin playing Russian claw roulette or whatever, and explaining why everyone's all together. But that aside, if my memory is correct, during Rogue's wedding, they actually did give Kurt a scene where he was pretty much like, "This is who my mom is. This is who she's gonna be. I can't change that, so I guess we deal with this." And it was a rare moment of the comics acknowledging that Rogue and Nightcrawler are siblings. And I would love to see more of that now that Destiny is back, looking at them as a whole family unit, not just Mystique, Destiny, and Rogue, and Mystique, Destiny, and Nightcrawler. And I had a point bringing that up, but I have no idea what it was. So I'm just going to end it there.
I see. I totally hear what you're saying, and I get it. And I mean, we have to move forward in a way. But I guess there's a part of me that's like, you know, a big part of the X-Men is that family is not blood. Family is like found family is legitimate, and you can have your found family. And so for me, it's like, okay, yeah, she's your mother. She gave birth to you, or she's your father, who, you know, God willing. But, you know, just because of that, just because you shared like DNA does not mean that, you know, you have to have any relationship with this woman at all. Like, you have a mother who raised you who's also crazy, but you have a mother who raised you and a family there that, you know, where the love actually came from. So, you know, like that whole, like, I can see him coming to terms with like, yes, okay, she's my mother or my father or whoever she is. I just don't ever want to see her again. I want nothing to do with her. How about? Because that's valid too.
So I want to circle back to one thing real quick. We were talking about Mystique as a trans character, and I want to just highlight something you were saying there. And this is not a thing, but Mystique being the sperm donating parent doesn't make Mystique the father.
Okay. Yes. Oh, fair. I didn't mean it in that way. I meant it more in the way of
Thanks for pointing it out.
the who gave what to what.
Yes, yeah, and I get that, but that's one of those language things that we gotta kind of reel back from, because that's very much a thing.
Apologies for that.
No worries.
That does also open kind of a question in the back of my head on if and when we finally get confirmation on where Mystique sits with gender, how that might present itself in terms of fluidity and transness, and, you know, was she identifying as a man when she became Kurt's father? Is that something that goes back and forth? And while I would love to see it on panel, I'm kind of afraid that's not something we're going to see for decades.
Well, and the thing is regardless, is her kids refer to her as mom. They call her mom. She's their mother. So that is the consistent thing that we're given, regardless of her genitalia presentation at the time of conception.
Thank you.
I want to say one thing about this, which is like in the description of the video. I chose to use this quote because I love this quote from Tini Howard's story in the last Pride issue, which was about Mystique and Destiny. And the quote said, "The woman you proclaim to love is no woman at all. She is a monster with eyes like a snake." And that was part of the dialogue of that issue. And that pretty much applies applies to this conversation, because Mystique has been implied to like not be a woman in some way, which is a kind of, in one way, it's like maybe it's because she's gender fluid. In another way, it's just maybe because she's trans, and trans women get like denied their womanhood. So she's like a monster. That's a line. And that, when I reviewed that short comic, I went into a whole thing with only that line, because for me that line was like, this is also hinting as Mystique as trans. Because why Moriarty would say like she's not a woman at all? Like, why, other than her mutanthood, there has to be something that he's trying to like push and hurt her about it. And those are the type of conversations that get around these topics. It's like, in some ways she's less of a woman in that scenario because of what we expect as a society, not because she has said so and identified so, because Mystique hasn't said so. So far, she hasn't said that she's a man in any situation. She just changes shapes as she pleases for using those shapes. So yeah, that's my point on this. And I would like, oh yeah, so go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think we touched on it a little bit, but as someone who uses identity and different personhoods as a tool, I think being a mother is also a tool for Mystique in a lot of ways. It's like she wants to be an active mother when it'll get her something in return, or when she will receive some type of advantage. So I think her being a bad mother is also integral to who she is as a character. She's someone who sees relationship and her personhood as currency, as something to be used to gain something. And I think that's the difference between her and Destiny. Destiny's invested in being a parent because it brings her joy, or it's something that she finds happiness in. And I don't think Mystique finds that same joy in motherhood. She just sees her children as another tool in her toolbox, which is what I love about the character, is that it also gives her a clarity. Like, I think she sees Rogue and Nightcrawler in a way that other characters don't, because she kind of cuts through all the societal norms and all the things that you should or shouldn't say, and just kind of gets to it. It's because she sees relationships in that way.
I love that you mentioned like her children as a tool in her toolbox, because I feel like that is 100% how she how she related to Kurt, especially when he was a child, like when he was first born, because she was into being a parent when it meant that, you know, I mean, granted, this is going on off of, you know, the current canon, which is that she is who gave birth to Kurt, but she was into being a parent when it meant that this was going to solidify her in this cushy, like, castle with a count, and make sure that she has some kind of semblance of stability. And then the moment the baby comes out blue and that goes to hell, it's like, well, I don't need this anymore. And that's when she just throws him off a cliff. So, and, you know, I mean, obviously that was mostly expounded upon in the Austen run, but even before that, you know, we saw, you know, that her baby had worth and value right up until the moment that he didn't. And then it was like, well, chuck him. And she does the same thing with, like, when Graydon was born. I mean, Graydon wasn't a mutant, so he's not useful either. Chuck him. And then Rose,
which is what it's such an interesting contrast between those two, also, because they were both rejected for the opposite reasons.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go for the two final questions, because either way we're not gonna finish anytime. I want to ask you all for reading recommendations for our viewers, and also I want to ask you all what, briefly, because we already touched on this a little bit, what you want for the future of Mystique and Destiny. So whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in first because I'm not going to have much to say, because like I said, I'm a late to reader, but definitely Inferno, the most recent Inferno, I think was such a great thing to see, with Mystique and Destiny getting reunited. And I just want to focus on their family going forward as a whole unit.
I'll jump in on that because I'm right there on the family train with you. I really want to see the dynamic. I want to see the dynamic between them as a couple, but also as a family. I'm going to say for my recommendations, I have it written over here, so let me find it. Oh, it's Weapon X. No, that's not the right one. Sorry. Okay, I'll say the first one is the one where the most recent Nightcrawler issue, the Nightcrawler Legends issue. I'm going to recommend that. It's not a great story, but what I like about it is that it is one of the only instances in which Destiny and Kurt really have a sincere interaction. So it's along that family line, and he has to do something to save Mystique. It's got that little family thing. It's not a great issue, but it does have the family. But I will recommend X Factor Annual number 6. That's what I was looking for. That is the issue where Mystique goes with Destiny's ashes to scatter them, and Destiny gives her very, very specific, like, detailed instructions. This is where you need to go. This is where you need to stand. This is the time you need to throw my ashes into the air in this way. And when she does it, the ashes immediately blow right back into her face as like Destiny's last little kind of joke on her lover. So yeah, that's a really beautiful issue too. So those would be my recommendations.
I'm going to recommend Uncanny X-Men 177 through 179. It's a 3-issue run wherein it starts with the stuff that I was talking about at first, which is Mystique fighting a bunch of X-Men robots for training. And then it goes on to the scene with the two of them in their apartment together. And then proceeds to over the next 2 issues to a Brotherhood encounter with the X-Men. And it sort of moves on to focus on Kitty towards the tail end of that. But for the first probably 2/3 of that, it's a very heavy Destiny, Mystique, Brotherhood thing that gives you a good idea of who they are and how they are together. I'm also going to recommend the Muir Island saga, which is, I don't remember the exact issues, but it's the tail end of Claremont's run. And it's when Destiny dies, but specifically it's when Destiny knows she's going to die and walks into that willingly and knowingly. And it is, the story has some flaws here and there, but that particular aspect of it, fantastic, just great reading.
I was also going to recommend X Factor Volume 1, Annual 6, because it's very beautiful and I think it shows their relationship. But I also have Marvel Fanfare number 40. It's a Storm story, but in the end they have a very beautiful moment where they dance, and I'm obsessed with just the last page. It's really good.
Yeah, I think for my Mystique choice, I chose X Factor Volume 1, 115 when she joins X Factor. And if you ignore the terrible Forge romance thing that they tried to make happen, I think it's a really good glimpse into who Raven is as a person and a lot of the things that we've been talking about, just that fluidity of self. She talks a lot about not knowing who she is and trying to figure out what that means to kind of have gaps in who you are in your memory and your personhood, which I think is really dope. And then for my Destiny story, I chose X-Men Legacy. I think it's 233 ? But Destiny comes back for a very short moment and kind of closes her relationship with Rogue in a really beautiful way. And I think it's one of the rare times that we get to see Destiny, her interior self. She talks a lot about why she loves Raven and why motherhood was so important to her with Rogue. And in terms of what I want to see in the future, I really, really kind of want Mystique off the Quiet Council so we can see her be a badass action hero again. I miss Mystique doing espionage and I don't know, just more of the action set pieces that we used to get. But above all else, I'd love to see the family reunited like everyone here.
Get rid of Beast and give Mystique X-Force.
Yes, oh my god, It'd be so evil and fun.
I mean, there might be less genocide.
Yeah. Somehow less evil than when Beast is running things.
Yeah.
But also more coherent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my recommendations are aside from everyone's recommendations, I subscribe every one of them, especially what the Uncanny X-Men issues and not said, and Marvel Fanfare 40. That's a really beautiful issue, and the dance that they have, and it's one of my favorites too. I would also recommend Uncanny X-Men. I think it's 225 and 226, which is, I think, what has this little moment of a story with Destiny falling into cramps about how mutanthood maybe will not survive, which is a really beautiful moment because then Mystique kisses her here, and it's really sweet. And
in a totally hetero way.
Like you do with your besties.
Just the best of gal pals. And I will also recommend for the sad gays over here, if you're a gay and you're sad, I would recommend Wolverines because it's a run that basically goes over Mystique trying to bring Destiny back. You think it would be about Wolverine and the various Wolverines, but only part of it is, and I really like the trick. And but that's for the sad case because it's a really sad story, and Mystique is kind of the villain there, but she's like trying to, and it really, really connects with Inferno. Like I would especially recommend people who have not yet read Inferno for some reason to read Wolverines first, because it really, really connects with emotionally with what happens with Destiny when she's brought back, when the type of crisis that she has, it makes a lot of sense. And for the future, I would love to see them more in the comics. That's my main thing. I love them. I also would love to see the family dynamics like everyone has talked about, and I would definitely love to see them written by trans and sapphic people, because like that has not happened that much, and I'm not sure if how much, but like maybe Louis Simonson somewhere, but like that's one of my main wishes for like having someone explore their relationship from the perspective of someone who can relate to some of the stuff that we have talked in this show. And okay, so that's it. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add. I'm sure you all probably have things to say, but like
I'm going on saying things for now like 25 weeks or something with my podcast. So yeah, we got plenty to say.
Yeah. Yelling about X-Men is my favorite pastime.
Same.
It's what brings us all together.
So thank you all for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
This was great.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I had a great time. You were an amazing host.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I hope we can have like each one of you in the future for other shows, because like we love having people come here to talk about shit. And like, yeah, and like we're really excited about what happens after Pride. I really hope that this like Pride comic brings some stories forward that we can like then talk about more, because that's the shit.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So bye, and thank you for everyone that has watched, that we watch, and we have cats over here.
The cutest.